Hi kids, Pastor Paul here again, here in the kids' church room. This was all set up for green screen for the last few months. Here's the green screen all folded up on the table behind me. We might use it again, who knows, but in the meantime, here is a video for you, the latest chapter in our Think Like a Detective story, and I hope you enjoy that. And then underneath the YouTube clip, you'll find a link to a download you can do with an activity based on this work today, based on the idea of witnesses, which is what this chapter is all about. Hey, after the video today, there are all the latest things to fill in for those of you filling in a detective toolbox. And if you're wanting to learn the skills of a detective, you'll need to keep track of those. And we'll be making a video like this every week, so you're not going to be left out if you can't get to church. In fact, we'll look at adding some other bits and pieces to it. We'll see how we go. Looking forward to seeing you back live in this room whenever you can make it, whenever mum and dad can come along. And in the meantime, God bless. Have a great Sunday, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
If I believe it, I can receive it. Open my eyes and heart and pray. If I believe it, I can receive it. Taking a hold of the truth today. Higher, I'm flying higher with you. Stronger, I'm getting stronger, it's true. Deeper in love with you. Whoa, 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 whoa. If I believe it, I can receive it. Open my eyes and heart and pray. If I believe it, I can receive it. Taking a hold of the truth today. Higher, I'm flying higher with you. Stronger, I'm getting stronger, it's true. Deeper in love with you. Whoa, 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 If I believe it, I can receive it. Open my eyes and heart and pray. If I believe it, I can receive it. Taking a hold of the truth today. Higher, I'm flying higher with you. Stronger, I'm getting stronger, it's true. Deeper in love with you. Whoa, all right. Higher, I'm flying higher with you. Stronger, I'm getting stronger, it's true. Deeper in love with you.
This story comes from a book called Cold Case Christianity for Kids, which is written by a real-life police detective by the name of J. Warner Wallace. You can learn even more about how to think like a detective by going to his website, casemakersacademy.com. You and Daniel decide to pay Daniel's big sister Lacey a visit. Lacey is 10 years older than Daniel, and Daniel remembered that Lacey attended Livingston School many years ago. So it's time to show her the skateboard and see what she remembers. I've seen it before, says Lacey as she looks at the skateboard. At least I think I have. Moses Singleton, she recalls. Moses was 3 years older than me, and I think he had a board with big wheels like this one. He was very tall and always wore black board shorts. He moved away from this area about 5 years ago. Excited, you and Daniel pay another visit to Mr. Martin at the Great Skate Shop. Moses, he says, I didn't know they had skateboards back when Moses was around. You all laugh as you imagine Moses in the Bible wearing board shorts and riding a skateboard. Mr. Martin looks serious again. Just kidding with you guys. I think I know the guy you're talking about. He did wear black shorts and his board had big wheels, but he wasn't very tall, so I don't remember him like that. You and Daniel are a bit confused as you update Jeffries in the next lesson. Our witnesses don't seem to agree, says Daniel. Mr. Martin's description of Moses seems to be different to Lacey's description of him. We're not sure what to think. Jeffries rubs his chin for a moment, then says, Let's talk about witness testimony today. I've been working with eyewitnesses for over 20 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Eyewitnesses never agree entirely. That doesn't mean they're wrong or lying. Here's a question for you. How tall was your sister 9 years ago, Daniel? Oh, she was much shorter. She always says she got her growth spurt after. And then he suddenly realises something. Wow, I didn't think of that. Moses might have seemed really tall to her back then because she was shorter. And to Mr. Martin, adds Jeffries, Moses might not have seemed very tall at all. It really comes down to the way people see things. And everyone is different, so they sometimes see the same thing in a different way. It's our job as detectives to put all the statements together to get to the total truth. Detective Jeffries turns to the whiteboard. There are 4 questions we need to ask to find out if a witness can be trusted. Number 1, were they actually there? Because if they weren't there, they are not a witness. Number 2, can we confirm what they say in some way? Like, does it match the evidence we've already got? Or does it agree with some other witness? Number 3, have they changed their story over time? You have to figure out if they've been honest with us and accurate, or if they've changed their story somehow. Number 4, do they have any reason to tell a lie? Some people may have something to gain by telling a lie about someone else, for example. Alright, that's it. If you can say yes to a witness for all 4 of those questions, you've got a good witness. But if you say no to one of those questions, then you don't really have a good witness. You can't trust them. If they weren't there, or if you can't prove or confirm what they say with some other evidence, or if they change their story over time, or if they have a good reason to lie, like they want to get rich or famous or something, or they want to take revenge on the person, then you can't trust them either. Alright, let's see if Lacey and Mr. Martin pass this test. Hannah already thinks they have. Well, they were both old enough to have contact with Moses, so we know they were actually there. And Mr. Martin's description of Moses' shorts seems to match the description given by Lacey, so that confirms her story. Jason adds, and there's no reason to think they've changed their story over time or have any reason to lie to us, so they must be reliable witnesses. Good, says Jeffries. Now let's return to the case for Jesus for a moment. Jason, I asked you to do some research last week. What did you find? Well, I read the 4 Gospels and I see there are places where the stories don't seem to be entirely the same. But now that I understand what eyewitnesses are like, I guess it's not that surprising. Exactly. Now let's ask our 4 questions to see if the witnesses mentioned in the Gospels pass the test. What's the first question? Were they actually there? Says Jason. But how would we answer that question? Well, let's use our detective minds again. He returns to the whiteboard. If I asked you to write a short summary of your skateboard investigation yesterday, would it include the information from Lacey or Mr. Martin? No, says Daniel. We didn't get that information until today. That's right, Jeffrey says. So, next week, if we were looking back through all our notes about the skateboard case and we found a note you'd written that didn't mention your talks with Lacey and Mr. Martin, what would you know about that note and when it was written? Well, then it must have been written before today. Exactly. Good detective work. Now, let's look at the evidence from the Bible, says Jeffries as he draws a timeline on the whiteboard. The Apostle Luke wrote about the lives of the disciples after Jesus rose to heaven. Does anyone know the name of that writing? Yes, says Evelyn. It's called the Book of Acts. Correct. Jeffries congratulates her. Well, it's missing some important information. For example, Luke never describes the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, the city of Jerusalem was an important city, and it was destroyed by the Roman army in a specific year. Luke says nothing about that. He also says nothing about the death of the most important people in the book of Acts. The Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, and the Apostle James, Jesus' brother. He mentions how other people die, but not these incredibly important leaders. He starts to draw on the board. All right, so we can see here, we know that all of these events occurred between 61 and 70 AD, and yet Luke doesn't mention any of them. Now think about your summary of the skateboard investigation yesterday. You wouldn't have written about Lacey and Mr. Martin talking because those things hadn't happened yet. So why do you think Luke left this information? He pointed at the deaths of Peter, James and Paul and the destruction of Jerusalem. Why do you think he left these out of the book of Acts? Because they hadn't happened yet, asked Jason. Yes, I think that's very reasonable, replies Jeffries. So that means Luke wrote the book of Acts before 61 AD. That would explain why the deaths of Paul, Peter and James and the destruction of Jerusalem are not in the book of Acts. Okay, but I still don't get it, you say. How does this help us to know if we can trust what the Bible says? Look, Luke wrote 2 books. Before he wrote the book of Acts, he also wrote the Gospel of Luke. That means that he wrote that Gospel earlier even than 61 AD. Jeffries writes it into his timeline. So, can you see how close the writing of the Gospel of Luke is to the actual life of Jesus? This Gospel was written quite early, while people who really knew Jesus were still alive. If the Gospels contained lies, the people who knew Jesus would have spotted them. It's hard to fool people who are there and know the truth. Jeffries folds his arms and looks out at the cadets to see what they think. Wow, says Daniel. That was a lot of work just to answer question 1 and show that Luke was there, but is there any other evidence that supports his story that shows we can trust what he and the other gospel writers say? Yes, okay, let's look at question number 2, which is, can we confirm what they say by other evidence? Well, in the case of the witnesses of the gospel, yes, we can. For example, people have been digging around all the places mentioned in the Bible for hundreds of years and discovered many of the cities it talks about. Is that like archaeology, you ask? Yes, and there's more. We've also found many documents that are not written by Christians that also talk about Jesus and his miracles. We found various objects like jars with crosses on them from before 67 AD that show there were followers of Jesus around while witnesses were still alive. We found Peter's house with inscription that mentions the Apostle Peter. We found other proof that things written in the Gospels were true, like the names of leaders at the time and other events, like even the darkness that happened at the time Jesus died is mentioned by other people that are not Christians. It's all quite interesting, and when you're older, you might like to study it some more. But how do we know if they weren't lying about, the resurrection? Asked Jason. Jeffries comes and sits on the table. Now let's jump down to question number 4. Did the authors have a reason to lie? What would they get for their trouble? They ended up dying for their claims, and there isn't any evidence they got rich or successful or even popular. Many of them were put to death for teaching about Jesus, but none of them ever changed their story. Jason was almost convinced, but asks another question. Okay then, what about the question that you didn't answer? What about question 3? How do you know the story of Jesus wasn't just changed over time? Maybe the first version didn't even contain all the miracles I read about last week. What if those parts were added later by people who did have something to gain or did have a reason to lie? Everyone in the room goes quiet. Says Jeffries. Now you're starting to think like a real detective. I'll help you answer that question the next time we meet. That's it for today, everybody. See you next time.